Welcome, everyone. We've transitioned from our first 3 sessions of policy to our final 2 sessions of strategy. So you've been, as I told my last panel, you've been filled with ideas of what you want to fight for, but now you need to know, how do we fight for them? And I'm very, very excited about this panel because it is about banding together to run and govern as folks that believe in deepening democracy. So often it's told about how do you as an individual win an election, but with political cooperatives and progressive caucuses, we've talked about, we have models for banding together, and we have a representative, a senator now from a political cooperative and 2 chairs of progressive caucuses. So to get started, we'll get into the nuts and bolts eventually of how these each work. But to get started, I'd love just the stories of quick intro from each of you on who you are, but then the stories of your political cooperative or progressive caucus, just to introduce our audience to where you're coming from on this forum. So let's start with Senator Cynthia Mendes of the Rhode Island Political Cooperative.
Awesome. I'm so happy to be here, Pete. Thanks again for having me. Our story for the Rhode Island Political Cooperative actually starts a number of years ago with Matt Brown, who's a former Secretary of State, Jeanine Culkin, who was a former senator in Rhode Island and now, again, is currently a senator, and a Senate candidate, Jennifer Rourke, who all experienced running for office in Rhode Island and going up against the political establishment there, and realizing just how crushing it was to be progressive and to run in a very, very conservative state. And they kind of came together and co-chaired the Rhode Island Political Cooperative and ran a slate in 2020 of 24 candidates. So that's kind of a little bit of the birth of the story of how it began, and then I kind of jump in there. But yeah, it was really birthed from kind of realizing that the Rhode Island Democratic Party had no space for progressives and were actively oppressing them. And yeah, here we are.
And just talk a little bit about individually the experience of not running alone, but running together with a bunch of other candidates on a shared slate.
Yeah, it's almost impossible in Rhode Island to run individually. You don't run for office unless you've been tapped on the shoulder by the political establishment and given permission to run. And if you do dare to do that, you absolutely do not win. The Rhode Island Democratic Party is obviously unrestricted in their abilities to support and coordinate with their campaign, with their candidates. And progressives are obviously left on the outside with restrictions. And so to be able to run with a slate of like-minded nurses, teachers, activists, and to be able to run on a shared platform where we were collaborating, sharing volunteers, talking and grieving and celebrating together all along the journey was really, really empowering and also energizing to our community, who just had never seen themselves both racially, gender, and working class kind of represented in the state house and halls of decision making. So yeah, it was beyond energizing, and we're now governing together, which I look forward to telling you about later.
Yeah, and we're going to get into more of the details of the Rhode Island Political Co-op. And just to emphasize for the audience who hasn't heard about this isn't some political group endorsing 20 candidates and saying, oh, they're, all endorsed by this group. They are working together. The word is correct. They are cooperating with each other, sharing staffers, sharing a platform, really cheering each other on in a deep way. Let's go to Representative Guzzardi on, a governing cooperation, which is the Progressive Caucus of Illinois. Could you tell a little bit about the story of the Progressive Caucus of Illinois and how you became involved?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a bit of a different story, sort of the reverse in some ways from Cynthia. We had a very similar Democratic Party in Illinois, which is very centralized, very centrist, and very interested in sort of holding down and holding back progressive challengers to the establishment. So what happened in Illinois is that, I ran in 2012 for the first time and lost by 100 votes, and ran again in 2014 and won against an incumbent establishment Democrat from a very powerful Chicago machine political family, and got to Springfield and was kind of largely alone. There were like one or two other progressives, but we sort of whispered together in back rooms, and that was kind of the situation. And then over the past several years, more and more people started winning, and rather than cooperating like you guys are doing on the front end, we each fought our own little independent battles against the machine. And some of us were fortunate enough to prevail. And eventually there's sort of a critical mass of us got down to Springfield, and we were able to form a legislative caucus. So there are now 17 members in the House Progressive Caucus. And we have been working together. We formed at the beginning of 2019. So we've been working together for the last 3 legislative sessions, setting policy agendas for our group and trying to move the policy agenda for the Democratic caucus at large. And we've had some remarkable progressive political victories in the last several years, legislative victories, I should say, as well as political victories. So we're really proud of the work we've done and eager to do more.
Thanks. And on to another progressive caucus, the one in Pennsylvania. Representative Fiedler, chair of the Pennsylvania Progressive Caucus. Could you tell a little bit about the story of how your caucus came to be and how you became involved in it?
Sure. Thank you so much, Pete. And I just want to say what an honor it's to be on this panel and be on here with 2 very esteemed colleagues from other states. It's just very, very exciting. So I'm Representative Elizabeth Fiedler. I'm now in my 2nd term in the State House in Pennsylvania and chair of the Subcommittee on Progressive Policies for Working People. We are brand new. Like I said, I'm in my 2nd term and really excited to have two colleagues who've been with me since the beginning, Sarah Innamorato and Summer Lee from Allegheny County. Speaking of, fighting battles before you come in, the 3 of us stuck together, and it's amazing to serve with them. And along the way, we've brought on some additional colleagues, co-conspirators, fellow like-minded progressives, and really excited about what we are just starting to grow in the House. We have seen some recent electoral victories, including a new colleague, Rep. Rick Krajewski, who is a good friend of mine. Psyched to have him coming out of Philly as well. And just really trying to grow the, I would say, nascent progressive movement that we have, but very, very strong. Before I came to serve in the State House, I worked as a reporter for the NPR station in Philly. I'm the mom of 2 little kids, and I heard a lot from my colleagues that I was like shaking my head to. I had to turn off my mic because I was agreeing so loudly. When you look at the traditional party structures, they're not necessarily like welcoming us with their open arms right from the beginning, saying like, all right, awesome. What are you interested in running for? How can we incorporate you? But I think we're doing a job here trying to push and be out there and be loud and be organized.
Thank you. This is wonderful intros, and we're seeing some overlap and patterns in multiple states of seeing this. Now we want to get into the details of some of this, because some people listening right now, we got people from all over, might be thinking about how do I either invigorate my progressive caucus or run as a political co-op in my state or start a progressive caucus that hasn't been started yet. Because we know a majority of states do not have a progressive caucus. So there is a lot of work to be done to spread this model. Let's talk a little bit about the strategy for bringing it together. Let's start with you, Senator Mendes. I'm sure it's much easier said than done to say, to transition from we got a bunch of people that are mad at the establishment and want to be an alternative to really being a well-oiled political cooperative. So what were some of the challenges you faced, and what were some tips you have for others who want to form a political cooperative about overcoming those challenges? Let's talk a little bit about the model design of the Rhode Island Political Cooperative and what advice you have for those wanting to model it.
Absolutely. So the Rhode Island Political Cooperative, basically it supports candidates and their campaigns in 3 ways. So first, it enables a slate of like-minded candidates who support a common policy agenda and don't take campaign contributions from corporate PACs and lobbyists and fossil fuel infrastructure and industry. And they run together, helping and supporting each other, and they learn from each other. The second way that we kind of run together is we are provided, because it is a fee-for-service, I can explain that in a second, comprehensive direct service for each campaign. So each candidate is provided training, a campaign manager, training oversight, campaign plan, communication support and development, and deployed then volunteers to canvass statewide. And then the third is it provides a counter to the power of the corporate money in politics that we see here, which is overwhelming. And it provides a means for particular candidates to participate and build a statewide base and a statewide donor base, which is very, very important because, as we know, progressives are underfunded, right? So we lose because of lack of training and campaign managers, and we also lose because of lack of funding. So this is a mechanism to circumvent that. And so oftentimes the question is, okay, so what is the legal status of a cooperative or a political cooperative? So it's a non-profit corporation that has no shareholders or owners and accrues no profit. It's not the type of nonprofit that is tax exempt. So it's not like a 501c3 or 501c4 where there are restrictions for the ability to provide campaign services to candidates. It's providing those services essentially to the mission of the cooperative. It's a fee for service. So because all the candidates who are running on the shared slate pay dues to the cooperative, there's no restrictions on coordination there. And so we're members of a cooperative in that sense. And so I really wanted to explain that because we had just finished getting on a session call about worker cooperatives, and it's a little bit of a different model. So I know I was expecting some questions on that. And anybody that has any further questions about that can absolutely reach out to the Rhode Island Political Cooperative. I'll have all that kind of information handy, and hopefully that kind of answers some of the structure of the Rhode Island Political Cooperative. And one of the biggest hurdles that we have when running is, whether progressive orgs, 501c3, 501c4s, and PACs, there's a coordination issue there. And so this circumvents that as being able to all work together, fully coordinated, which we were able to see. The last thing I will say is we were able to see how incredibly important that was in COVID, when the way the elections were happening changed in real time, turnout changed, everything changed. And so to put progressives out into the world without support in 2020, this model particularly was able to help us win. So we actually won 10 seats in the House and the Senate. We won 10 seats. An incredible amount of wins, which I'll share later.
Great, and we're going to circle back to you about how you govern after you win, because suddenly a co-op turns into a bit of a caucus after you win. But first, Representatives Guzzardi and Fiedler, let's talk a little bit about how, the brass tacks of your caucuses. What are you trying to achieve as a caucus? What literally do you do? Do you meet? Do you have a shared agenda? How do you balance also, I hear a lot from progressive legislators about how do you play the inside versus outside game? You don't want to be marginalized and just be the people that never pass any bills and yell about the establishment, but you also don't want to just go along with the establishment. That's why we need to have a different power base. So how do you navigate that? What are the strategies, and what literally do you do as a caucus? And either of you to go first. Representative Guzzardi, why don't you go first?
Yeah, sure. Lots of questions there, and I'll try to take them as I can think of answers on my toes. In terms of what we literally do, we meet regularly during the legislative session. We try to meet every week during session, although toward the end of session, it gets kind of hectic and difficult to pull everyone together. We endorse bills, and we create an agenda. So in this past legislative session, we picked a handful of issues that the caucus all supported, not legislation per se, but sort of top line issues of like affordable housing, expanding access to healthcare, and then during the course of session, as legislation got introduced and as members sort of proposed bills to the caucus, we created a list of bills that were endorsed by the Progressive Caucus. And we have bylaws and a process by which to do this. I think to the degree that I'm giving advice to folks who are thinking about starting their own progressive caucuses in their states, this is a bit of a sidestep from your question, Pete, but it feels important to say.
Go ahead.
Write bylaws and write a statement of principles too. Like, I think one question that I get a lot from people who are interested in doing this work is like, well, how do you keep out the people who might claim to be progressive in the same way that, I don't know, Kirsten Sinema claims to be progressive or whatever, right? Like, I shouldn't be naming names and calling people out on this call. That's a bad look. But you know, that how do you identify who's really progressive enough to be in the Progressive Caucus? And that's a tricky question, right? But the way we decided to resolve it in a way I think really helped was to write like a pretty unflinchingly bold and progressive statement of principles. And to require in the bylaws that members sign on to those principles in order to join the caucus. And that one other piece I think that I would say is really instrumental in terms of what we do and in terms of how the caucus functions is that we have a leadership team, the officers of the caucus. There are 3 co-chairs, a secretary, and a treasurer. And I think having a sort of core group of people who can do the nuts and bolts and brass tacks work of drafting a statement of principles, of driving the agenda, of calling the meetings, of like moving the work of the caucus forward. I think when you can have that core group, it just will make it easier to manage and sort of operationalize the things that the caucus needs to do. So those are a few lessons that we found helpful in getting our thing off the ground.
Thank you. I so appreciate the actionable tips for this. Representative Fiedler, anything you want to add on what y'all do in Pennsylvania?
Sure. So in Pennsylvania, we have what we have right now is a progressive subcommittee. Much of our work has focused on policy hearings and on trying to get ourselves organized. We also focused a lot on the budget, the state budget recently, and obviously the infusion of federal dollars was part of that. We had held hearings around it, took positions on things, but are really, I think, moving in the direction. And there's a lot of interest in what Rep. Guzzardi was just mentioning, which is a formal progressive caucus. I know a number of other states have it as well. So definitely going to reach out for some help and advice, hopefully, on the bylaws and how to get things started, because there's a lot of excitement and energy here about doing things like taking positions on specific legislation and moving things in that way, in addition to the policy hearings that we're holding.
Thank you. Senator Mendes, you know, as I said earlier, your co-op became, you know, suddenly was not people just running, but people governing. Could you tell a little bit about how that transition was navigated and what you do now that you're a cooperative of legislators, not just candidates?
Yeah, it was really amazing to see the shift in the State House almost instantly. So there were policies that we ran on that the State House previously hadn't touched before, which would be, you know, $15 minimum wage housing, healthcare, you name it. There, we ran on a bold policy platform. And before we even started session, just at the caucus, the leadership decided to roll out their legislative priorities for the session. And wouldn't you know that a lot of them were ripped from our platform. And so, you know, we were excited to see some movement there. We saw $15 minimum wage passed, source of income for housing addressed really in the first month. And so what we were able to do then is, because we were used to talking and working together, because we broke bread often and trained together, and our teams worked together, we knew what was going on in each other's lives. In session, we were texting each other real time. So when someone was issuing an amendment that we didn't like, who was going to get up and speak on it? And we knew each other's strengths, right? So, and if it's education, I would tap in my friend who's a professor, and, you know, if it's healthcare, and so we were able to coordinate that way. A beautiful thing that also developed, that's kind of an unintended result of the co-op, is there's this built-in accountability. We ran on a shared platform, and that platform was the floor, not the ceiling. in order to be in the co-op, we all agreed on these basic things. You could go off and go a little bit deeper. You want to go left or like, that's great. But we all agreed on those things. So when you end up in the chambers fighting together, there's this shared accountability there that, you know, when the leadership wants to propose, you know, something less or watered down, we knew that we were going to fight together and no one was going to drop back and sign on to anything less than the floor that we had already previously been working on. So it created accountability there, and that produced results.
It's wonderful. And we're seeing co-ops spread to other states. You know, I'm from Virginia and I, you know, been in touch with the person who's running the Virginia political co-op. We're seeing other versions of it in North Carolina. There's a thing called the Carolina Federation that's proposing a bunch of folks running together at the same time under a shared agenda. I'd be interested for the governing side on progressive caucuses or subcommittees. How do you balance the, you know, these aspects of like the inside versus the outside game? When do we decide we're all going to fight versus when do we decide that, you know, this isn't the time? When do we get involved in, you know, there's stuff at the federal level of like, you know, proxy wars in different elections and try to grow your caucus by supporting different primary challengers versus not. Anything on how you navigate that as leaders of cohorts of politicians?
Yeah, that was a part of your question that you asked before that I neglected entirely to answer. So kudos to you for asking it again. You'll get an answer from me this time. Yeah, I think, so one feature of our progressive caucus is that we don't have a political operation. So we don't do what the Rhode Island folk do and like band together for shared electoral goals. So like we don't have a political action committee or nonprofit that can do that stuff. So that's not a space that we engage in jointly. Many of us, you know, are on the same side in lots of elections, as you might imagine, but not always. And that's not like a sort of requirement for membership in the caucus. And it's something that I think we as a group want to develop, but we wanted to start with a sort of legislative solidarity piece. But your question about the inside-outside game is incredibly powerful and important. And our caucus collaborates and works closely with a variety of progressive political organizations in the Chicago area and across the state of Illinois. And I mean, I think as all of us experience to a degree, that's a tension that we navigate, right? As legislators, especially as movement legislators, right? We have to navigate the tension between what the movement is demanding and what the political realities will allow. And when is the moment where we're going to say, you know what, we can live with half a loaf on this because it's all we're going to get? And when is the moment where we say compromise is not acceptable? We won't take $12 an hour. I mean, there was a time in 2016 when I first got started when the Democratic leadership of the caucus was like, can we just do $12 an hour and like be done with this? Because I was carrying the bill for 15 and they just wanted to, you know, let's average the current minimum wage and what workers are demanding as a basic necessity and come up with something in the middle. And, you know, I tell that story a lot because the legislators who are working on this issue and the movement folk who are working on this issue got together and assessed the state of play and decided that we were going to hold out for the thing that we all really believe we deserved and that we could move the political landscape to meet us, right? And that if we were sort of insistent in our demands, we would be able to bend the arc toward what we wanted. So it's a challenging dynamic, and I have, you know, had as much contention in my legislative career with my like deep allies and friends on the left as I have with Republicans on the opposite side of the aisle because of this very tension. But I think when you're communicating honestly and openly and often with your allies outside of the dome, they understand what the realities and the dynamics are, and you can sort of use that tension constructively to push the dynamics inside and to get as much as you possibly can.
Representative Fiedler, any final minute, any word on any tips for others who want to expand this? Any hopes on the horizon for what you're hoping to do to expand your work with fellow progressive legislators in Pennsylvania?
Sure, definitely. I do think that as more and more movement candidates coming out of movements are elected, we're going to see this grow even more, right? Not just expectations, but an actual working relationship. We're going to figure this out. We're going to have open communication with the folks who helped to get us to this point. Our goal in Pennsylvania, and I know across the state, is to find a way to bring the outside inside, right? Bring it under the dome and make sure that we're not just the voice of the people we represent, but that they're right there alongside with us, going up to the governor's door, wherever it may be. So I don't know, I'm just really excited. It's exciting to see what's being built across the country and the openness of people who are doing it, sharing thoughts, sharing ideas, all in the best interest of working people across the country.
Thank you, Representative Fiedler. I'll give you the last word, last 30 seconds, Senator Mendes. Such an inspiring story out of our smallest state, Rhode Island, but a seismic change in the model for how people run for office is going to spread. So any final words of encouragement to others who want to copy your model?
Yeah, I would definitely encourage people to explore the cooperative model, particularly because, I prior to this, I had never been involved with politics. And so this really created a pathway for everyday people who were already serving their community, who were already elbow deep in the work, to have a place of decision making in their state house and for the people that they were serving. And so I highly recommend exploring that, because those mechanisms do not currently exist, and we need to find ways to hack the system and actually give power back to the people.
Wonderful. And I'm sure each of you are open to folks reaching out to learn from all of you. And so please, we'll drop more information on how to reach out. Thank you, Senator Mendes and Representatives Fiedler and Guzzardi. And one final panel for all of you in the audience on strategy coming up in 1 minute. So we ended just in time. Thank you so much, and keep up the good fight to the three of you.